The wind blew hard that evening, carrying small bits of snow that danced under the streetlights. The city was alive but distant. Cars rushed by, people hurried into warm cafes, and everyone seemed to have somewhere to go. Everyone except a thin, quiet girl walking slowly along the sidewalk. Her coat was too small for her. The sleeves barely covered her wrists, and the old scarf around her neck had lost its color years ago. She held her hands inside her pockets, trying to hide them from the freezing air, but her fingers had already turned pink from the cold. She didn't walk like she had a destination. Her steps were unsure, almost hesitant, like she was deciding what to do with each block she passed. She looked through the glass windows of a few buildings, the bakery, the music shop, a cafe full of laughter, and for a moment, she stood still just watching. Her breath fogged up the window, and she wiped it gently before walking on again. It had been a long day for her. The cold had settled deep into her bones, and she hadn't eaten much since morning. Still, there was something in her eyes that said she wasn't ready to give up. As she turned a corner, she noticed a large building ahead. Its tall glass doors were glowing softly from the light inside. The sign above it read, City School of Music. The warmth spilling out from the lobby made her stop. She didn't know why, but something about that building pulled her in. Maybe it was the faint sound of a violin echoing from inside, or maybe just the thought of warmth. She stood near the entrance for a few seconds, looking at the polished floors and the people walking past the front desk. She wasn't sure if she should go in. She looked down at her old shoes, covered in a thin layer of snow, and sighed. But the cold was too much to bear, so she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The warmth hit her instantly, felt like stepping into another world. She stood there for a moment, rubbing her hands together, trying to bring back some feeling to her numb fingers. The floor was clean and shiny. The air smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the soft notes of a piano being played. She felt out of place. Her worn clothes stood out among the neat coats and scarves of the students walking by. Some of them gave her curious glances, but she kept her eyes down. A woman behind the front desk looked up from her papers. "Can I help you?" she asked politely but with a touch of suspicion. The girl hesitated, then said softly, "It's very cold outside. Can I just stay here for a little while?" Her voice trembled slightly, not just from the chill but from nervousness. The woman looked her over, unsure if it was allowed. But something about the girl's eyes, quiet and kind, made her nod. "Just for a little while," she said. The girl smiled faintly, whispered a thank you, and moved toward a corner near the wall. She found an empty seat beside an upright piano that looked like it hadn't been played for some time. The black surface of the piano reflected the warm lights from above. She sat down carefully, placing her small bag at her feet. Her fingers still shook a little as she rubbed them together for warmth. She didn't take her eyes off the piano. For a few minutes, she simply sat there, listening. From the upper floors, she could hear faint bits of music. A flute in one room, a cello in another. The sound of a violin being tuned echoed faintly through the hall. The music was imperfect but full of life, and it filled the place with something soft and beautiful. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wrap around her like a blanket. It had been years since she had been this close to a piano. She remembered the one her mother used to clean in a community center, an old wooden instrument that she had once been allowed to play when no one else was around. That was before everything changed, before her mother lost her job, before they had to move into a smaller place, before music became a distant memory. She used to dream of learning properly, but lessons cost money, and dreams were expensive. Her thoughts were broken by the sound of footsteps nearby. A few students walked past, talking softly about an upcoming recital. One of them laughed, holding a violin case. The girl looked down, not wanting to draw attention. When they were gone, she looked again at the piano. Its keys seemed to call her name, silently inviting her to touch them. But she hesitated. This wasn't her place. She was just a visitor, a stranger trying to get warm. Still, her heart ached a little. She wondered what it would feel like to play again, just for a moment. Outside, the wind howled against the glass doors. She could see people hurrying past with their collars up and scarves wrapped tight. The warmth of the lobby made her eyelids heavy, but she didn't want to close them. She wanted to keep looking at that piano. It was as if it held all the stories she'd never told. Her fingers twitched slightly, like they still remembered the feel of the keys. After some time, the woman at the desk left for a short break. The lobby grew quieter. Only the hum of the heaters and the distant sound of music remained. The girl looked around. No one seemed to notice her. Slowly, she stood up. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long, and she rubbed her arms before walking toward the piano. She ran her hand gently over the surface, wiping away a bit of dust. The wood felt cool under her fingers. She hesitated for a long moment before lifting the cover. The keys looked worn but clean, each one holding a memory of someone's practice, someone's song. She placed her fingers on them but didn't press down yet. Her heart beat faster, and for a second she thought about sitting back down. But then, softly, she pressed one key. A single note filled the air, light and pure. It echoed through the quiet hall, bouncing off the walls. She froze, half expecting someone to tell her to stop. But no one came. Encouraged, she pressed another key, then another. The sound was uneven, unsure, but it carried emotion, something honest. Her fingers started moving slowly, as if remembering a story they had once known. The notes formed a gentle melody, simple and imperfect, but full of feeling. Each sound seemed to fill the cold spaces inside her chest. For the first time that day, she forgot about the cold. The music warmed her in a way the heaters never could. Her shoulders relaxed, and she smiled without realizing it. The melody grew, her hands moving with more confidence. A few students walking by turned their heads, surprised. They hadn't seen her before, and her music didn't sound like a beginner's. It sounded like someone pouring her heart into every note as she played. Memories flooded her mind. Her mother humming while cooking, the sound of rain outside their old apartment, the day she first touched a piano. Every key brought back something. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her eyes half closed, completely lost in the sound she was creating. The song wasn't something she had learned from a book. It was something that came from within, quiet pain mixed with a fragile kind of hope. The lobby, which had once felt big and cold, now felt smaller, warmer. The receptionist, returning from her break, stopped near the entrance, listening. She didn't interrupt. She just stood there, surprised at the beauty of the music coming from someone who looked like she didn't even belong there. The girl continued to play, unaware that anyone was watching. Her hands moved faster now, still trembling but graceful in their own way. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes slowly, realizing the silence around her. She looked around nervously, hoping she hadn't done something wrong. The woman at the desk smiled softly but said nothing. The girl quickly lowered the piano cover and sat back down. Her cheeks were flushed, her heart still racing. She didn't know it yet, but someone upstairs had heard her. Someone whose life would soon cross hers in a way she could never have imagined. She sat quietly again, her fingers still tingling from the music. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway above, but she didn't notice. She was thinking about how it felt to play again. The warmth that spread through her chest, the small spark of joy she hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the storm continued, but inside, something had changed. The cold evening that had driven her into the hall had given her a small piece of warmth, not just in her body, but in her heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for that moment, she was content. She had found shelter, a piano, and a bit of herself again. All in one quiet, ordinary evening that was about to become anything but ordinary. The next morning, the cold air still hung over the city, but inside the music school, everything was calm and bright. The girl returned quietly, unsure if she would be allowed inside again. She had spent the night in a small shelter near the bus station, her thin blanket doing little to fight the chill. But even as she lay there, she couldn't stop thinking about the piano. The way it had felt under her fingers, the way the sound had filled her chest. For the first time in months, she had felt alive. When she reached the music school, she stood by the glass doors once again. Through them, she saw students rushing to class, their instruments slung over their shoulders, their laughter echoing faintly in the warm air. She hesitated, afraid that the woman at the desk might turn her away this time. But her desire to feel that music again was stronger than her fear. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The same woman looked up from behind the counter. For a second, her face showed surprise, but she didn't say anything harsh. "You're back?" she asked softly. The girl nodded, her eyes unsure. "I can sit quietly. I won't touch anything." The woman sighed but eventually smiled a little. "All right," she said. "Just for a while." The girl thanked her in a whisper and moved toward the same corner where the piano stood. It looked the same, polished black surface, a little dusty near the edges, waiting silently. She sat in the same chair, hugging her knees for warmth. Around her, the sounds of practice rooms filled the air again. Someone upstairs was singing scales, and a cello hummed from behind a closed door. The building was alive with sound, but it all felt distant to her. She didn't dare touch the piano right away. She just sat, listening, her eyes following the people who passed. Some students greeted each other cheerfully, some carried stacks of music sheets, and others seemed lost in thought. Everyone had a purpose, a dream. She wondered what it would be like to belong somewhere like this, to be one of them, to have lessons, teachers, performances. She imagined walking through those halls with confidence instead of shyness. A group of children about her age walked by, laughing loudly. One of them pointed toward her and whispered something, and they all giggled before hurrying up the stairs. She lowered her gaze, pretending not to notice. Moments like that had become familiar. People saw her clothes, her quietness, and made assumptions. But she didn't blame them. Life had taught her not to expect kindness from everyone. Time passed slowly. The front doors opened and closed as more students arrived. The woman at the desk answered calls. Teachers came and went, and yet the girl stayed silent in her little corner. The piano sat untouched beside her, almost like it was waiting for her again. Eventually, the lobby grew quieter. Most of the classes had begun, and the echo of footsteps faded down the hallways. The girl looked around. No one was paying attention. Her heart beat faster. She stood up and ran her fingers over the piano's surface. The coolness of the wood made her shiver again. She hesitated, glancing toward the desk. The woman was busy talking to someone on the phone, not watching. The girl lifted the cover just enough to see the keys. They looked brighter today, touched by the soft light streaming through the tall windows. She rested her hands on them gently. The keys felt familiar, like greeting an old friend. For a few seconds, she did nothing, just breathing in and out. Then she pressed one key, the same soft note as yesterday, and the sound echoed through the lobby. It was small, but it felt like magic. She pressed another, and another, stringing together a few notes. Her fingers were still cold, stiff from the weather, but as they began to move, they remembered. She played quietly at first, afraid someone might stop her. But the more she played, the deeper she fell into the sound. It wasn't about showing skill or impressing anyone. It was about feeling something again. Peace, hope, warmth. Her music filled the empty hall like a whisper. The melody was simple but beautiful, something she seemed to create on the spot. It spoke of sadness, but not the kind that breaks, the kind that still hopes for better days. A janitor sweeping the floor nearby paused for a moment, leaning on his broom, listening. The tune reminded him of his childhood, of his sister who used to play at their old church. But when the girl noticed him watching, she stopped suddenly, startled. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, standing up. "I didn't mean to." The man shook his head gently. "Don't stop," he said. "It sounds nice." The girl blinked, unsure how to respond. It had been so long since someone had said something kind to her. She sat back down slowly and began to play again. The janitor smiled faintly and went back to work, letting her music fill the air. Minutes turned into an hour without her realizing it. She moved through soft melodies, sometimes stopping to think, then continuing. Every note seemed to carry her feelings: loneliness, gratitude, longing. Her music spoke where her words couldn't. Eventually, the woman at the desk noticed her again. She was about to tell her to stop, but paused when she heard the melody. There was something pure about it, something that didn't sound like a random passerby playing. She listened for a while, her expression softening. When the girl finished, the woman clapped lightly. The girl looked up, startled again. "That was beautiful," the woman said quietly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl shrugged shyly. "Nowhere, really. I used to play a little when I was younger. My mother worked at a place that had a piano. I just listened and tried." The woman nodded, impressed. "You have a gift," she said. "Most people take years of lessons to play with that kind of feeling." The girl smiled weakly, not knowing what to say. Compliments were rare in her world. She felt both happy and embarrassed at the same time. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. The girl stayed in her corner watching students go by. She didn't touch the piano again. One song was enough for the day. The woman offered her a small cup of hot tea before leaving for lunch. The warmth of it made her eyes sting a little, though she didn't know why. Maybe it was because of how long it had been since someone had shown her kindness. When the woman stepped outside, the girl remained alone again. The sunlight shifted through the windows, casting golden lines across the piano. She stared at it, lost in thought. What if she could stay here? What if she could learn again? The thought scared her but also gave her hope. Just then, she heard footsteps echoing from the staircase above. Someone was coming down, steady, slow steps that carried a kind of authority. She turned her head but saw only the shadow moving closer. She didn't realize it yet, but this moment would change everything. The footsteps stopped halfway down the stairs. Whoever it was didn't speak. The girl's hands froze above the piano. After a pause, the person turned and walked down another corridor, their steps fading away. She exhaled softly, unaware that the sound of her music had reached ears she never imagined. When evening came, she thanked the woman again and stepped back out into the cold. The city lights flickered across the wet pavement, and the air smelled faintly of snow. Her breath came out in little white clouds as she walked. But unlike yesterday, she didn't feel quite as cold. There was a strange warmth in her heart, one that no coat could provide. As she made her way down the empty street, she hummed the tune she had played earlier, her voice barely audible over the wind. The melody lingered with her, soft and steady. She didn't know it yet, but her music had begun to travel. From the lobby of a quiet music school to the mind of someone who had been listening closely, someone who would soon change her life in ways she couldn't yet dream of. And as the snow began to fall again, she looked up at the sky and whispered a small thank you. Not to anyone in particular, but to the piano, to the warmth, and to the chance that maybe, just maybe, her story was only beginning. The next day was quiet in the music school. The air was cold again, and small flakes of snow drifted past the tall windows. The director of the school, a man who had spent years teaching and guiding students, walked through the hallways with his hands in his pockets. He was known for being observant, always noticing small details that others missed. But lately, nothing had caught his attention until yesterday. He had been walking down the stairs when he heard something faint, a melody coming from the lobby. It was soft but filled with emotion, unlike anything he usually heard from his students. There was no showmanship, no performance for applause, just pure feeling. He had paused, hidden by the corner, and listened for a while. When he finally looked, he saw a young girl sitting at the piano, her back straight, her small hands moving gracefully over the keys. Her clothes looked worn, her hair a little messy, but there was something striking about her calmness. She didn't play for anyone. She played as if the piano was her only friend. He didn't interrupt then. Instead, he quietly walked away, deciding to learn more before saying anything. And now, as he stood in his office with a steaming cup of coffee, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she? How had she learned to play like that? He called the woman at the front desk. "That girl who came yesterday?" he asked. "Do you know anything about her?" The woman shook her head. "Not much. She came in out of the cold a few times. Very polite. Keeps to herself. She doesn't seem to have anywhere else to go." The director nodded thoughtfully. Did she say her name? No, the woman replied. Just asked if she could sit inside. Yesterday she played a little. She's very talented. He smiled faintly. Yes, he said quietly. I heard. For the rest of the morning he couldn't focus on his work. Papers sat untouched on his desk while his thoughts kept wandering back to the girl and her music. Around noon, he decided to take a walk through the lobby, hoping she might appear again. Outside, the wind howled against the doors, but inside, it was calm. The woman at the counter looked up as he approached. You're looking for her? She asked knowingly. He gave a small nod. If she comes back, let her stay. I'd like to speak with her. The woman smiled. I thought you might say that. Hours passed, and the director attended to his usual tasks. Meetings with teachers, a few student performances. But every now and then, he found himself glancing toward the lobby whenever he passed by. By late afternoon, the girl appeared again. She looked the same, wrapped in her thin coat, her cheeks red from the cold. She entered quietly, almost shyly, and gave a small smile to the woman at the desk. The woman nodded warmly and gestured toward the piano. The girl sat down, her eyes falling on the instrument as if she were greeting an old friend. She brushed a bit of dust from the keys and started playing softly, just as she had before. The notes floated through the hall, filling every corner with warmth. This time, the director didn't hide. He stood a few steps behind her, listening silently. His heart stirred as the melody unfolded. Simple, heartfelt, unpolished but beautiful. Each note carried emotion, a kind of truth that professional musicians often lost in their pursuit of perfection. When she finished, her fingers rested on the keys for a moment before she sighed quietly and looked up. That's when she noticed him standing there. Her eyes widened in surprise. She stood quickly, unsure if she was in trouble. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to play without permission. The director raised a hand gently. No, he said kindly. You played beautifully. Please don't apologize. She blinked, confused by his calm tone. You're the director? She asked softly. He smiled. Yes, and you must be the young musician everyone's been talking about. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed. I'm not really a musician, she murmured. I just like to play. He walked closer, his expression thoughtful. That's what makes you one, he said. Liking to play, feeling the music, that's what matters most. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to her before. He gestured to the piano. Would you play something for me? Her eyes darted between him and the instrument. Now, if you're comfortable, he said gently. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly, but something in his tone, warm, patient, gave her courage. She sat down again, took a deep breath and began to play. This time, the song was slower. The first notes were hesitant, but soon her hands found their rhythm. The melody told a story of winter nights, of quiet hopes, of dreams tucked away. It was as if she was speaking through the piano, saying everything she couldn't say with words. The director closed his eyes and listened. Each note seemed to paint a picture. A small figure walking through snow, a flicker of light in a dark alley, the feeling of holding on to warmth when the world feels cold. When the last note faded, silence filled the room. The director opened his eyes slowly. The girl looked nervous again, waiting for his reaction. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he walked closer and placed a gentle hand on the piano's edge. You have something special, he said softly. Where did you learn? She shook her head. Nowhere. My mother used to clean a cafe that had a piano. When no one was around, I tried to copy what I heard from the musicians who played there. He smiled sadly. So, you taught yourself? She nodded. That's remarkable, he said. Most people need years of lessons to play with that kind of emotion. You play with heart. Her eyes glistened. I just play what I feel, she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, realizing she wasn't just talented. She was honest, raw, and pure in her connection to the music. It reminded him of why he had fallen in love with teaching in the first place. After a pause, he asked, "Do you go to school anywhere?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." He frowned slightly. "Do you live nearby?" She hesitated. "Sort of. I move around a lot." He could see she was uncomfortable talking about it, so he didn't press further. "Would you like to come back tomorrow?" he asked instead. Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes," he said with a smile. "I'd like to hear more. And maybe show you something about music." She nodded quickly, her face lighting up for the first time. "I'd love that." The woman at the desk, who had been quietly listening, smiled too. There was something hopeful in the air, a small spark of possibility. As the girl left that evening, she couldn't stop smiling. The cold wind no longer felt as sharp. For the first time in a long while, she had something to look forward to. Someone had noticed her, not because of her situation, but because of her talent. Meanwhile, the director stayed behind, thinking deeply. He knew talent when he heard it. He also knew pain when he saw it. That girl carried both in her music. He decided he wouldn't let her slip away unnoticed. She had a gift, and he would do what he could to help her shape it. That night, as snow fell quietly over the city, the girl found a small bench near a bakery and sat down to rest. The owner, recognizing her from the night before, gave her a small loaf of bread without asking for payment. She thanked him softly and ate while watching people pass by. Her heart felt lighter than it had in months. The melody she played earlier echoed in her mind, blending with the sounds of the street. She imagined the director's kind face, his encouraging words. Maybe, just maybe, life was beginning to change. When she finally lay down under her blanket, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I'll play better." And as she drifted to sleep, the snowflakes kept falling, covering the city in white, like a quiet promise of new beginnings. The next morning, the city woke up under a blanket of snow. The streets were quiet, and every sound seemed softer. The crunch of footsteps, the distant hum of buses, even the whisper of the wind. Inside the music school, warmth spread through the air as students arrived, stamping snow off their shoes and greeting each other with laughter. The girl came a little later, her small figure almost hidden under a worn coat and scarf. She held her hands close to her mouth, breathing into them to keep them warm. When she entered the building, a few people looked her way, but she walked straight toward the piano in the corner, her steps quiet and unsure. The woman at the desk greeted her with a smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "The director's been asking if you'd come back." The girl stopped, her eyes wide. "He asked?" "Yes," the woman nodded. "He said to tell you to wait for him when you arrive." The girl felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. She sat near the piano, brushing her fingers across the keys without pressing them. The air smelled faintly of polish and paper, the sounds of violins and flutes drifting through the walls from nearby rooms. A few minutes later, the director appeared, his usual calm expression softened by a smile. "You came," he said warmly. She nodded shyly. "You said I could. And I'm glad you did," he replied. "Would you like to play something today?" She hesitated. "Maybe later," she whispered. "I still feel a little nervous." "That's all right," he said kindly. "We can start slowly. I just wanted to talk for a bit." He sat on a nearby bench while she stayed by the piano. "You have a natural gift," he said. "The way you play, it comes from the heart. That's something no teacher can give. But with a bit of guidance, you could become something truly special." Her eyes lit up with hope. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," he said gently. "Music is a language, and you already speak it beautifully. All you need now are the words, the notes, the structure. Would you like to learn here at the school?" She froze, unsure if she'd heard him right. "Learn here?" He nodded. "I could arrange it. We have scholarships for students who show promise. You'd have lessons, a warm place to practice, even meals if needed." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. For a moment, all she could do was stare at the floor, afraid that if she looked up, the dream might disappear. "But I don't have money," she whispered. The director shook his head. You wouldn't need any. Sometimes, talent is the only ticket required. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. No one had ever offered her something like this, not out of pity, but because they saw something in her. She took a shaky breath and said softly, "I'd like that. More than anything." He smiled. Then it settled. From that day, things began to change. The director arranged for her to have access to a small practice room whenever she wanted. It wasn't fancy. Just a piano, a chair, and a window that looked out over the snowy courtyard. But to her, it felt like heaven. Every morning she came early and practiced. At first, her fingers stumbled, and she grew frustrated when she couldn't remember certain melodies. But the director encouraged her to keep going. "It's not about perfection," he reminded her. "It's about feeling." Sometimes he sat with her, teaching her how to read music, explaining what the lines and dots meant. She learned quickly, her eyes shining with curiosity. Other times, he simply listened, letting her play whatever came to mind. The woman at the desk often brought her tea during breaks, smiling as the girls' laughter grew more frequent. The janitor would pause his sweeping just to listen to her new melodies. Slowly, everyone in the building began to notice her. Not as the shivering girl who had once asked to stay in the hall, but as the young pianist whose music could warm even the coldest days. Weeks passed and her playing grew stronger. She began to experiment, mixing small pieces she remembered from the cafe with her own creations. The director often said her music told stories without needing words. "Every note you play," he told her, "feels like it's trying to heal something." One afternoon, as she practiced in her little room, the director entered quietly and stood behind her. She was playing something new, a soft melody that rose and fell like a whisper. When she finished, she turned and saw him smiling. "What's that piece?" he asked. She shrugged. "I just made it up. I call it a promise." "Why that name?" She thought for a moment. "Because when I play it, I feel like I'm promising myself that I won't give up, even if things get hard again." The director nodded slowly, deeply moved. "That's a beautiful promise," he said. "Would you like to perform it at our winter recital?" Her eyes widened. "A recital? But I'm not ready." "I think you are," he said softly. "You've come so far in such a short time. The world deserves to hear what you have to say. Through your music." She hesitated, fear creeping in. "What if I mess up?" He smiled. "Then you'll start again. Music isn't about never making mistakes. It's about never losing heart." After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "I'll do it." The days leading up to the recital were full of practice and nerves. The girl spent hours refining every note of her song. The director watched her with quiet pride, helping when needed but letting her find her rhythm on her own. The night before the recital, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her shelter, looking out at the falling snow, humming her melody softly. It had become more than a song. It was a piece of her journey, of the nights she spent cold and alone, and the warmth she'd found within those walls of music. The next morning, the school buzzed with excitement. Students in crisp uniforms tuned their instruments, parents chatted in the audience, and the stage lights glowed softly. The girl waited backstage, her hands trembling, her heart racing. She had never performed in front of anyone before. The director found her just before she went on. "Nervous?" he asked kindly. She nodded, her voice small. "A little." He smiled. "Good. That means you care. Just remember, play for yourself, not for them. Play the way you did that first day, when no one was watching." She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The audience quieted. The piano gleamed under the lights. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then she sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. Her first note was soft, almost a whisper. Then came the second, the third. Slowly, the melody unfolded, weaving through the hall like a thread of warmth. The room fell silent except for her music. Every sound carried her story. The cold nights, the kindness she had found, the promise she had made. When the last note faded, there was a long, breathless pause. Then the audience erupted into applause. Some people even stood. The director clapped the loudest, his eyes shining with pride. The girl stood slowly, her cheeks flushed, her heart full. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not as someone lost, but as someone who had found her place. As she walked off stage, the director met her with a smile. "You kept your promise," he said. She nodded, her eyes bright. "And I'll keep it forever." That night, as snow began to fall again outside the school, her music lingered in the air like a gentle echo, a reminder that even the coldest winters can give birth to the warmest songs. The applause still echoed in her ears long after she stepped off the stage. Her hands trembled, her heart raced, and her eyes glistened with quiet disbelief. For a long moment, she just stood behind the curtain, clutching her fingers together, trying to understand what had just happened. The sound of people cheering for her felt unreal. The director approached, his smile full of warmth. "You did it," he said softly. "You told your story, and everyone heard it." The girl could barely speak. "I didn't think they'd like it," she whispered. "They didn't just like it," he said gently. "They felt it." Someone from the audience called her name, asking her to come back out for a bow. She hesitated, then peeked from behind the curtain. The crowd was still standing, clapping, smiling, some even wiping tears from their eyes. When she finally stepped forward again, the lights felt softer, the air warmer. She bowed awkwardly, a shy smile spreading across her face. For that one moment, the cold winters, the sleepless nights, and the empty days seemed far away. All she could feel was light. After the recital ended, people came up to her in the hallway. Some asked her name, others told her how her music touched them. A mother with a little boy even said, "You made my son want to learn the piano." The girl didn't know what to say. She simply smiled and thanked them, feeling both overwhelmed and grateful. Later, the director handed her a small envelope. "This is from the board," he explained. "They were impressed. They'd like to offer you a full scholarship, officially this time. You'll study here properly with teachers and lessons. You'll have a place in our music family." She opened the envelope and stared at the letter inside. Her eyes filled with tears again. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already have," he said with a kind smile, "by playing from your heart." From that day on, her life slowly transformed. She moved into the student dormitory, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the snowy courtyard. It wasn't fancy, but to her it was perfect. For the first time, she had a place that was hers. She began taking formal classes, learning theory, reading music, and practicing daily. It wasn't easy. Some lessons were hard, and there were days she doubted herself, but she never forgot the feeling of that first performance. Whenever she struggled, she'd sit quietly and play a promise, the melody that had carried her through everything. The other students grew to admire her. She was quiet but kind, always ready to help someone who was struggling. She never bragged about her talent, never tried to outshine anyone. Her music spoke for her. It wasn't about showing off, it was about feeling, connection, honesty. The director often stopped by her practice room, just to listen. Sometimes he didn't even say a word. He'd simply sit by the door, close his eyes, and let the music fill the space. Months passed, and winter slowly gave way to spring. The city thawed, flowers began to bloom, and the courtyard outside the school filled with laughter again. But even as everything changed, one thing remained constant: the girl's love for the piano. One evening, near the end of the school year, the director called her into his office. The warm glow of the lamp lit the room as he handed her a letter. "This came for you," he said. She took it, confused. It was an invitation, a regional music competition for young pianists. Her name was listed among the participants. "I don't understand," she said. "I didn't apply." He smiled. "I submitted your name. I thought it was time your music reached a few more ears." She stared at him, unsure whether to be excited or terrified. "But what if I'm not ready?" He leaned back and said calmly, "You thought the same before the recital, didn't you? And look what happened. She smiled nervously. That's true. Then trust your heart again, he said. You have something real. People need to hear it. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. She practiced every morning and late into the night, polishing every note of her performance piece. But she also took time to breathe, to walk outside, and to watch the world around her. She'd often sit by the courtyard fountain, listening to the soft rush of water while humming new melodies under her breath. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. The hall was much larger than the one at her school, filled with bright lights and rows of serious-looking judges. She felt her chest tighten as she sat at the piano, staring at the keys. For a moment, fear crept in again. The same kind she felt the night she first walked into the music school, cold and unsure. Then she remembered the director's voice. Play for yourself, not for them. She took a deep breath and began. The first notes were delicate, like snowflakes falling in slow motion. Then came the melody, a promise, her own creation. But this time it was different. It carried everything she had lived since that first cold night. Hope, warmth, courage, and gratitude. As the music flowed, the hall grew quiet. Even the judges stopped writing notes. The melody swelled and softened, a reflection of every emotion she had once kept hidden. When she played the final note, it lingered like a sigh before fading into silence. The room remained still for a moment, and then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder, until the entire hall was filled with it. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She bowed her head, whispering a small thank you under her breath. When the results were announced later that evening, she didn't expect much. But when her name was called for first place, she stood frozen in shock. The director, sitting in the back of the hall, smiled proudly as everyone clapped. After the ceremony, he walked up to her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You see, he said quietly, a promise kept. She laughed through her tears. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have, he said. You just needed someone to remind you of who you already were. That night, as they walked out of the building together, the stars shone brightly above the city. The air was cool, but not biting, more like a memory of winter than its presence. She looked up and said softly, It feels different tonight. The director smiled. That's because you've changed the tune. Years later, people in the city would still talk about that winter night, the one when a shivering girl walked into a music hall and sat at the piano. They'd tell the story of how her song touched hearts and changed her life forever. As for the girl, she continued to play, not for fame, not for money, but for the same reason she had always played, because music was her home. Every note she played carried a piece of her story. The cold streets, the warmth of kindness, and the promise she once made to herself to never give up. And somewhere, in a quiet hall filled with soft light, her music still echoed. A reminder that even in the coldest of winters, a melody born from the heart can warm the world.